Now, while Europe's refugees have been getting most of the headlines, their plight has certainly heightened the attention to refugees everywhere. To get more insight into this, I spoke with Tim Unwin, the UNESCO Chair in ICT4D and Emeritus Professor of Geography, Royal Holloway at the University of London. I asked him what impact the refugee situation has in countries like Ethiopia, which hosts the largest number of refugees on the African continent.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right to emphasise that European countries have been very concerned about Europe, but there are more sort of refugees actually being hosted in nearby African countries than there are in terms of this overall wider diaspora, and that's often forgotten. And so you have countries which are very poor, often that already have a large immigrant population as well. And you mentioned Ethiopia, which has a very substantial migrants coming into the country, and so undoubtedly there is huge pressure. And I think one of the challenges, and certainly that the global community is looking at, is how we can support not only in terms of just sort of the basic economic wherewithal, but for refugees, giving them opportunities to link back to their homes and their families, to get training. And one of my particular interests is how we can use technology to support them. But it's undoubtedly a serious strain on the economy. But a point I'd like to make is that we need to consider refugees and general migration together, because something that's happened over the last 20 years in Africa is a very great increase in general migration. I think something like Africa's 15% of the world's population and has 14% of the world's sort of international migrants. So much of it is from neighbouring countries, and in the case of refugees, it's just to get anywhere that is safe from the persecution from which people are fleeing.
Now, Tim, you mentioned some of the resources and some of the support. What sort of support is Ethiopia getting at the moment, being that they are hosting such a huge number of refugees?
I think it's very difficult to get any accurate figures on this, and the simple answer is they're not getting enough. But whether the government is allocating resources to the overall migrant population is again a moot point. People often see migrants and indeed refugees as a burden. And sort of living in a country like my own, where we've had this recent huge debate about migrants, I certainly see migrants generally as bringing positive assets. They bring a huge amount of, very often, energy and commitment and skill sets. Many refugees are people who've got considerable expertise, and if a country can use that and build that in, so not treat them in a sense like an isolated community, but help to integrate them into the fabric of the country. The UNHCR is doing, I think, generally a fantastic job in difficult circumstances. But one of the reasons why the UN General Assembly is discussing this today is very much so that we can get an integrated global approach. This rapid response framework that they're looking at, and planning. I think there's sort of 3 or 4 elements in it. Planning to know what is like to happen. Secondly, being able to implement it effectively and quickly.
Tim, what's being done to address the root causes of the crisis in some of these countries producing the highest number of refugees? Eritrea, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. What's being done there? As
everyone who's listening to this will be well aware, there is no easy response. This is hugely complex. I think you could begin with just 3 key principles. You have to ask why people are leaving. They're leaving because they're afraid for their lives, afraid for the lives of their families and loved ones, and that is because of very often political oppression and physical violence. Looking at that in a broader picture, it is possible to argue that people are able to leave now, much more perhaps than they were in the past. Oppressive regimes would actually have killed many more people and sort of kept them within the boundaries. So the fact that there are flexible boundaries can be seen as a good thing, enabling refugees to escape. Secondly, I think, and this again, the meeting at the General Assembly today talks about things that could be done for refugees and migrants together, and then separately for refugees and migrants. But if the nature of the political regime is the first point, and secondly, there is real environmental hardship. So people do become refugees to escape the ravages of climate change, for example. And there we can help to build more sustainable economies.